But now, our station is presenting the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon. It might make people feel the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon is the peak of traditional Chinese medicine. That's not true. Don't misunderstand. If you say the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon is the peak of traditional Chinese medicine, that it's declining. That's not the case. Why do modern people who focus on wellness often mention this book? Is it just for show? Though people do love dramatic headlines. You mentioned that the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon was out, but it doesn't clarify that the emperor thought. He actually wrote it. Such things, the more you take traditional Chinese medicine, the better it is for your brain. That's how I feel. And you mentioned that everyone understands the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon. You might not fully grasp this idea. It utilizes such ideas, using public opinion for Shintran effects. As I mentioned earlier, its purpose is to set the framework. It also introduces some of my original medical ideas. This works well. Fundamental principles are covered here. Great. Now let's talk about Bian Ku, who is very famous. Even if you haven't studied medicine, you'd ask them to name two famous TCM practitioners. There's Hua Tu, and there was Bian Ku. Bian Ku wrote a book called The Lan Jing, or Wasteful Text. Lan means wasteful, not difficult to read. There are two books with contrasting names. One is the I Ching. The other is the Wasteful Text. The Wasteful Text is accessible. Unlike the elusive I Ching, what's the use of the Wasteful Text? In short, he discusses many topics related to the Huangdi Neijing. You could also say it fills gaps in the Huangdi Neijing. He suspects that parts of the Huangdi Neijing may remain unexplored. When we discuss it, it hasn't been explored deeply enough. He addresses some gaps in the emperor's internal classic. Is this Bian Ku the famous physician from historical records? It's not entirely clear, considering when it was developed. Lanjin originated from the emperor's internal classic. Bian Ku was likely from before the Han Dynasty, the famous physician mentioned in historical records. So they are generally called moon seekers. If the emperor's internal classic was mostly compiled in the Han Dynasty, it didn't exist during the Qin Dynasty. So perhaps this name was used by different people. There seems to be more to explore here, but let's focus on Bian Ku. Let's stick to the historical Bian Ku, as it may relate to TCM. There's a famous anecdote here. Wei Wenhao asked Bian Ku which of his three brothers was the most skilled. Bian Ku replied that his oldest brother was the best. His second brother came in second, and he was the worst. Why? He said, "My oldest brother can heal the incurable without falling ill." However, his reputation was local. Neighbors knew. My oldest brother could cure minor ailments without turning them serious. My second brother can manage minor ailments without them turning into major diseases. Everyone in town knows that. I can save those with severe illnesses. As everyone knows. Which seems harder to you? It seems Bian Ku's skill is harder. Actually, the first one is even harder. There's another weird aspect about human nature. If I save you from a serious illness, you're very grateful. If I keep you healthy and free of illness, you might not notice or feel grateful. Traditional Chinese medicine, as I mentioned, focuses on life, health, and disease. For example, preventing illness is something traditional Chinese medicine excels at. It's skilled at keeping minor illnesses from becoming severe. Isn't this preventive care? However, Western medicine focuses more on treating diseases after they occur. Western medicine is a bit like what Bian Ku did. Traditional Chinese medicine does a bit like what his elder brothers did. Their reputation wasn't great before, but it has improved lately. But these health and wellness books are often of mixed quality. To be honest, there are many things in them. To be honest, I wouldn't call them misinformation. However, some parts are overstated, or stretched from a 7 out of 10 to a 12 out of 10. There are such cases, but objectively, it appears that some TCM concepts have spread among the public. At least, TCM has had an influence among the public. It gradually expanded, leading to some negative consequences. It did have some positive impact on TCM's development. During the Eastern Han Dynasty, Zhang Zhongjing was also renowned. If you ask around, folks say, you might think of Bian Hua, and Hua too. In the TCM world, who is most respected? But Zhang Zhongjing wrote Cold Damage Treatise. Later scholars divided it into the Shangyan Lun and Jinhui Yalu. Note that Shangyan differs from the modern concept of typhoid fever. Shanghan refers to injury from cold pathogens. Simply put, it means catching a chill. The resulting changes from catching a chill. Simpler put, it deals with external illnesses. It explains how to diagnose and treat external illnesses. Jinhui Yalu, on the other hand, covers internal diseases. What are internal diseases? These internal diseases are not the folkloric kind, but resemble modern internal illnesses. Examples include hypertension, peptic ulcers, coronary heart disease. No specific names in ancient times. However, this concept exists. It refers to these diseases as mentioned in Jin Ge Yao Lu, so it's generally said that he created differential diagnosis and treatment. A comprehensive treatment theory. In other words, before Zhang Zhongjing, there were actually 3 specific diagnostic categories, including disease patterns and symptom diagnosis in TCM. These 3 concepts explore traditional Chinese medicine and differential diagnosis further. I feel the Huangdi Neijing contains many of these concepts, sometimes involving these concepts. And regarding Zhang Zhongjing's use of differential diagnosis and treatment, the concept was still developing. To rephrase, the current TCM diagnostic approach, referring to symptoms, this approach focuses here. It began with Zhang Zhongjing, and there's another model as well. It's now thought to be closely linked to Zhang Zhongjing. He heavily worked on herbal formulas. Note that he didn't create the formulas, but he greatly developed them. Have you noticed? What did the Huangdi Neijing discuss? The Ling Shu focuses on acupuncture, discussing physiology, pathology, diagnosis, and treatment. The Ling Shu also covers similar topics. There are only a few prescriptions in the Huangdi Neijing. Before Zhang Zhongjing, Chinese medicine may have been centered around acupuncture. From Zhang Zhongjing onward, the influence of prescriptions grew. Do you think acupuncture became Xia then? I don't think so. In fact, it's like this. For example, when a patient comes in for some conditions, acupuncture is more effective than herbs. For others, herbs may be more effective. Combining both works best. So even though you specialize in acupuncture, but mastering herbal medicine is also crucial. Because you face patients and must choose. You also study Western medicine. Have prescription rights for now. If Western medicine works well for this condition, I don't think I should reject it. Since the goal is to help patients, I'll use what works, or which combination is best. I'll use whatever works best. That's why Zhang Zhongjing's reputation is so great, because it is rooted in diagnostic differentiation. It's about the use of these formulas and herbs. So some call it the master of formulas. I doubt that's quite right. You might say, it's been brought to prominence. But he didn't invent it. It does contain many well-known effective formulas. For instance, in that book on formulas, you'll study later. You'll learn about over 100 formulas. Pay close attention to these ancient formulas. You might even say there are countless. Those typically included in textbooks are quite classic. They are highly practical. Among the approximately 100 formulas, those from the Shanghan Jinhui may make up about 1/6 to 1/7. There's likely a significant amount of overlap if you consider the Huangdi, Neijing the first peak. Zhang Zhongjing's treatise on cold damage disorders is the second peak. Still, let me say, Zhang Zhongjing isn't necessarily the pinnacle of Chinese medicine, because medicine continually evolves. Later generations call him the sage of medicine. Quite curious, really, admiring the sages of literature and martial arts. And medicine is fine. It simply allows future generations to learn from them as role models, which is not a big deal. But the medical sage was also a person, so were the sages of literature and martial arts. If you raise their standards too high, future generations may find them unattainable. They'll feel overwhelmed. Then they can't learn. It would really knock their confidence. They were human too, so they could be surpassed. So don't keep that attitude. This represents the pinnacle. Medicine is evolving. Many of these ideas emerged much later than the Chongqing era. As we move forward in time, becoming a skilled physician becomes more likely, and information access has advanced significantly. Just thought I'd add, it was a fitting observation. A bit later than that era, perhaps, the uprising during the late Eastern Han Dynasty. He then pursued an acting career. Then, Hua Tu makes an appearance. But why is Hua Tu so famous in folklore, while his reputation in medicine isn't as great as Zhang Zhongjing's? He has lost out. There is no book now you say is attributed to Hua Tu, although there are legends, but they are not certain. Of course, Zhang Zhongjing is well known. So you're saying Hua Tu was very knowledgeable. I can't master your skills. In folklore, Hua Tu is held in high regard. Hua Tu was highly respected in his own time. When you study ancient Chinese literature, you'll learn more about Hua Tuo. Qiao Dun had an important status, unlike Zhang Zhongjing. However, as this book survived, later medical practices largely followed its blueprint. Its influence grew steadily. So here's the lesson. Write a book to gain fame. Certainly, write good books. For example, the Shenong Bencao Jing, Shenong Bencao Jing, a comprehensive herbal. Everyone learns these stories. But note, the Shenong Bencao Jing wasn't written by Shen Nung himself. It truly reflected the Han Dynasty. So what was its purpose? It laid the foundation for traditional Chinese medicine theory. For example, today's theory of traditional Chinese medicine. It categorizes herbs by their quality as cold, hot, warm, or cool, and taste as pungent, sweet, sour, bitter, or salty, using these 5 tastes to define their effects. This framework was established by the Shenong Bencao Jing. So these books essentially capture the early framework of traditional Chinese medicine. Or it can serve as a key reference. Okay, let's pick up the pace here. I'll cover this in the medical history section. And then I will discuss its development. First, let's look at the period of the Sui and Tang dynasties. This was a time of extensive practical applications. Modern Huangshua's annotated medical texts note this primary Chinese medical impulse from ancient times. There are countless of them. As you can see, these are all initial steps. Writing a book, however, is not that straightforward. Writing about the initial steps means entering a field unexplored by others, or even if anyone has tried. It didn't make much of an impact. Take a moment to consider. Don't just follow the crowd. If you see a book selling well, you might follow suit, which could bring economic gain, but lack academic innovation. Huang Shihang's book sells health practices, with the first one focusing on learning. Pulse diagnosis is about taking the pulse. People are studying traditional Chinese medicine. They find traditional Chinese medicine mysterious. Focusing on pulse diagnosis. Are pulse patterns really so miraculous? I think it's a bit exaggerated. We know that TCM diagnosis involves 4 modes of observation: listening, questioning, and palpation. What is the order of these steps? Later scholars' observation were: knowledge, called divine. Is observation alone enough for a divine diagnosis? Listening to the patient leads to knowledge. This is called holy. Learning by questioning is called wisdom. Understanding by feeling is called craftsmanship. Ranking isn't based on money, right? In simple terms, selling consultations is one of the 4 methods. Do you think I can diagnose just based on consulting? I think such doctors are rare, even if they exist. Relying just on consulting isn't very responsible. The more information I gather during diagnosis, the more accurate the diagnosis becomes. Even if you're really skilled. I have a few more questions. You have more references. Your accuracy will improve. But why does selling diagnosis become a symbol of traditional Chinese medicine? Actually, other medical systems do too, like Western medicine. Mosquito diagnosis exists as well. Other systems also use mosquito diagnosis. Pulse diagnosis is a proper and systematic method. It's quite unique to traditional Chinese medicine. You often represent it, or because it's very impressive. It's either this thing is really unique. I think it became the face of this TUSA because of its uniqueness. For example, if you're a doctor on TV or in a movie, you play a doctor. You ask the patient. It's hard to tell. Are a traditional Chinese medicine doctor or a Western doctor, but you make it clear who you are. There's a distinctive gesture or movement. And there's another point to consider. I did some research on the early days of medicine. The development of auscultation, olfaction, inquiry, and palpation wasn't very strong. The emphasis on consultations was quite significant, but later on, the use of auscultation, olfaction, and palpation grew, so its significance declined. But it remains just as important. But it's not very magical or complicated. In the Shengyang Zabing Lun, there was virtually no mention of tongue diagnosis. At that time, Zhang Zhongjing didn't use it widely. Nowadays, in clinical diagnosis, most doctors depend more on tongue diagnosis. Why is tongue diagnosis so objective? Sticking out your tongue. It's either red or white. If it's not red, you'd say it's white. You might say it's not that red. It remains red, though. The basic tone stays the same. But the appearance is very objective. For instance, floating and sinking fast or slow is favorable or unfavorable. It's objective. But there are many complicated aspects. He frequently uses descriptive terms. For example, descriptions of Lu Qingdao's clans. And techniques often use adjectives. Then you need to translate that adjective into how the pillow feels. It's quite challenging. So mastering pillow sales is key. But mastering it is a bit tougher than with other pillows. Alright, that's all for today.